Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Nick.
And I'm Alistair.
And this fortnight, we are here to talk about the new James Bond movie, No Time to Die. Daniel Craig's final outing in the role, and, incredibly, the first one of these they've released since we started doing the podcast. Come on, guys, pick it up. After that, we'll be returning to the alternate world of Marvel's What If to see how they ended the series, and to, as a bonus, count down our favourite 3 episodes each. But before all of that, Alistair, what else have you achieved in the last fortnight?
So I've been watching a show that there's quite a lot of buzz around, and it sort of came out of nowhere, which is Squid Game on Netflix. It's a Korean show, and as far as I'm aware, there hasn't been much build-up to its release. Netflix has been pushing it quite heavily, and I believe it's become the most watched thing on Netflix ever, or something like that. But yeah, the premise is, it follows a group of characters, primarily one main character who is a sort of lovable loser. He's very pathetic. He's kind of letting his family down. He's letting his slightly estranged daughter down. He's got no money, he's got no prospects, and then makes the terrible decision to take up a mysterious man he meets in the subways offer for easy money by playing a game, and the game turns out to be very deadly. It's pretty tense, and I would definitely recommend watching it.
I haven't seen this. I've seen a lot of chat about it, and it seems like we're getting to the point where I might consider watching it. But this is adults playing children's games that kill them? Is that the upshot?
Yeah, I think they are sort of games that Korean children play at school, so I guess they're equivalent of British Bulldog, for our British listeners. Not exactly sure what Americans play in school. Yeah, so I think the first one is a game, I think some variation on, I'm sure I played at school, when you've got to creep up to a line in the play arena, and there's a sort of character who, when they're looking at you, you can't move. When their back's turned, you can move, and you have to stop as soon as they turn and look. But obviously in this, if you move when they're looking, and it's a sort of giant robot thing, you get shot. So yeah, very much a violent version of kids' games, which makes it gives it this kind of surreal, technicolored vividness. It's kind of weirdly whimsical as well as being very dark.
Yeah, I was going to say, since you mentioned British Bulldog, that game was quite violent anyway.
Yeah, a lot of people got hurt in my school playing it. I think they banned it at one point.
Yeah, I did just glance at it on Wikipedia to check I'd correctly remember what it was, and apparently it has been flirted with being banned on various occasions. Anyway, things that are not actually in Squid Game.
Yeah, but I saw someone describe it on Twitter as Battle Royale Tenenballs, which is probably the most apt description ever, in that it does combine the dark grittiness of Battle Royale with, kind of visual flair of a Wes Anderson movie. It's everything's very brightly coloured. The people who kind of administer the games wear these sort of red boiler suits with either a cross, circle, or triangle on their face mask, very reminiscent of the PlayStation control symbols. And yeah, it's got a very distinctive visual style to it. There's a great shot in the second episode of people joining up for the game, and it's all these characters in different locations doing the exact same movement of kind of getting in the car. The shots all framed exactly the same way, and it's got a real distinctive visual flair to it. And again, the base where the games take place is kind of really lurid technicolors and very, kind of like the set of a children's TV show where everything's incredibly bright.
Presumably the actual British equivalent then would be to have Mr. Blobby lurch out of nowhere and kill you. Of course, the joke is that Mr. Blobby is actually horrific, so maybe that would be too on the nose.
Yeah, I guess so. I suppose, because especially from our era of children's television, everything seemed to be made for about 50p, so there was a lot of cheap and slightly weird stuff that went on. But I guess, I don't know, it's more like, if you were killed by Paw Patrol or something like that. I don't know, maybe I'm going on. Maybe I'm going off on a tangent with that one.
Bored to death. But no, it's interesting to see another Netflix show and another, I guess, foreign subtitled Netflix show successfully kick off and spread among the masses. I've seen people arguing in my mentions about the eternal battle between subs and dubs, which I don't often see, to the extent that I currently am.
Yeah, I guess whenever something that's not in English becomes popular, there's always this version. I guess with Netflix, they give you the option of choosing either way, so your mileage may vary. I suppose if you go to see a film like Paris 13th District, French film that's just come out or is coming out, you might be hard pressed to find a cinema that's screening a dubbed version, so you kind of have to stick with subtitles. But Netflix gives you the option. I mean, obviously I do prefer subs to dubs, but I don't want to be like a kind of hipster stroke school teacher of foreign language TV by telling people you're not properly experiencing the TV if you're not watching the subbed version. Whatever you want, as long as you're enjoying the show.
I just find their mouths not matching the noises annoying.
I
I too am not making a class judgment, but I find it annoying and distracting.
Yeah, I find it very distracting as well. And there's a kind of disconnect because even like someone who's a great voice actor, you're getting two performances. It's kind of like the weird, like, uncanny thing from Phantom Menace when they would use digital technology to cut different takes together. So you wouldn't be getting actors acting off each other. They would be acting off slightly different versions of each other, which just makes it look weirdly mismatched. So yeah, you've got this kind of performance conflict going on of two different actors doing the same line.
I mean, who knows? Now that every Disney Plus show is made using a cacophony of green screen, maybe all films are actually 20 different takes smooshed together. We may never know. Anyway, Squid Game. Yes, I hear it's good.
I would strongly recommend it if you're sitting on the fence. I would also recommend you watch it sooner rather than later to avoid spoilers. People are being kind of liberal with the spoilers, at least on my social feeds. I've already seen one slight spoiler, so probably going to motor on to the end as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I guess the danger with that is that once you start watching it, you immediately massively increase your spoiler risk because you're then able to recognise spoilers from context. Like, I'm sure I've seen a Squid Game spoiler, but I have no idea what actually happens or what it means. My eyes just drift over it.
Yeah, very, very much so. Yes, that is a good point. Once you become emotionally invested in something as well, the damage of spoilers is very high.
Yeah, but no, I would like to watch this while it's still, vaguely relevant.
Believe the hype is what I would say. Believe the hype. Squid Game is great.
Okay, we're buying in. We're going mainstream.
Anyway, while I've been traumatised by children's games, what have you been up to, Nick?
Well, while you've been watching adults play children's games, I've been watching teenagers play adult games. I'm not sure if that works or is a good thing to say. But anyway, yeah, I've been watching the new season of Sex Education on Netflix. Which...
Right, that makes sense now.
This does just about make sense. But yes, new season of Sex Education, Gillian Anderson, Asa Butterfield, and an absolutely vast cast of random kids. I've got to say, if this was filmed under COVID, and this is not the most interesting observation to make about Sex Education, but if this was filmed under COVID, they've done an amazing job. All the group scenes and the endless sections of people filing around corridors. I watched the last season of Lucifer recently, and you could very much tell it was filmed under COVID, because every scene took place in a room that had about 3 or 4 people maximum in it, apart from a couple of times where they splurged on a crowd scene. But Sex Education, no. I'm sure there are corners being cut or tricks being used, but they hide it well. And aside from that, yeah, it's another fun season of this weird coming-of-age / sex comedy.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of buzz around this show. I've not watched it. Probably should dive in at some point. It often gets talked about as a sort of like wholesome content, sometimes mentioned the same breath as Ted Lasso, as in this is kind of, although there's drama and tension, it's one of those shows that kind of ultimately makes you feel kind of good about life and yourself. Is that an accurate description, or is it darker than that?
I think it's got a fairly soft underbelly, although it's not above bad things happening to characters. Like a character underwent a not brutal, but nonetheless not pleasant sexual assault in the second season, and the emotional ramifications of that are being explored, and they're going to be explored, I think, in what I'm sure will be a very wholesome way through therapy. But, bad things do happen in order to, it feels like they are then scooting towards a happy ending and emotional awakening. But obviously also it's about teenagers and their sex lives, so there's a certain amount of angst, especially sexual and romantic angst. And by a certain amount, I mean a vast amount.
And so it's a comedy, is it? So it's quite funny.
Yeah, but the premise, although by the third season we are starting to stretch out exactly what the premise is a bit, but the premise in the first couple of seasons, more or less, was that the main character, Otis, played by Asa Butterfield, is the son of a sex therapist played by Gillian Anderson, who is great in this, as you may also have heard. And he seems to have picked up a load of sexual wisdom by osmosis, despite having had relatively little of it himself. And therefore he starts a strange sex clinic in an abandoned toilet for sexually confused students at his school, and sets about myth-busting these strange sexual assumptions they picked up from porn and so on. Yeah, it's obviously faintly weird. It's got a good sense of, silliness. Its approach to sex is very much, this is quite funny, isn't it? Or this is quite, in some ways, faintly ridiculous. It does make you smile. It'll sometimes make you feel a bit sad for the characters suffering. You do usually come away laughing and or smiling.
That sounds very good. I think people seem to have really connected with the characters a lot online. I guess they've got quite a large cast.
Yes, absolutely vast, to the point that, must admit, I've kind of forgotten who some of the background characters are, because at this point there's about five or six characters who are the main characters, but there's also about a dozen other people who have appeared at various plots to various degrees of importance, and every so often they will turn up and I'll feel like I'm meant to know who they are or what their connection is to some other character, but because this is modern streaming TV and there's no previously on Sex Education section, I have no idea. I mean, obviously that's what we have Wikipedia for, but nonetheless, it is mildly distracting in the moment. But yes, good show. It's also, I think, quite well known for existing in a strange world where a bunch of British kids go to an American school, basically. Like, the aesthetics of the school are incredibly American. It's all the sort of tribal thing, the geeks, the jocks, the queen bee girls, that sort of thing, which I gather isn't actually as much the case in British schools, he says, obviously miles away from being a British teenager himself, but is very, very much the case here. I think there are even people wandering around in Letterman jackets and stuff. It's very much what if a bunch of British kids went to an American school in Britain for some reason.
Yeah, I guess so they can sell it to America as recognisably a teen comedy, or even, I guess, like probably most British people recognise the teen comedy genre as, you know, the American archetypes rather than what being a British teenager was like. I mean, it's been a long time since I was a British teenager. I think I just recently passed the point where I've been a grown-up longer than I was a child, which is sort of depressing. But my teenage years were not like that. There was a bit of like, you know, the in-crowd, the kids who went to chess club. That was me. But it was nothing like it's shown on American TV. Well, no, it's not as extreme.
The world of sex education is quite sort of bright and technicoloured, and the fact that they're in this sort of weird unreality is, I think, kind of meant to be part of the vibe at this stage. Maybe it makes it easier to talk about the sex stuff, I don't know. Yeah, I do occasionally feel like it's a bit weird that this show is an hour-long premium drama when I'd almost rather have more shorter episodes. If I've mentioned sex education before, I'm sure I've also said this, because this was very much my hot take during seasons 1 and 2 as well. But yeah, I've come away thinking that was both very good, but also felt long. Weird. So yeah, if I were Netflix god, I would make this a longer season of half-hour episodes rather than 8 one-hour ones, but alas, not god yet.
Next up, we will be discussing No Time to Die, the much-delayed final James Bond film with Daniel Craig in the title role. In this film, James Bond is enjoying life with Madeleine Swann when they're attacked by Spectre agents. Convinced Madeleine Swann betrayed him, he leaves her and goes into retirement. 5 years later, when a mysterious group attacks a bioweapons research centre, James Bond comes out of retirement to track down the culprits, which involves diving into Madeleine's past, confronting Blofeld, and tracking down a mysterious figure in a mask hunting Madeleine. We saw this film recently, so Nick, what did you think of it?
I really enjoyed this, and I say this as someone who is not a vast James Bond fan. It's not something I particularly seek out. Full disclosure, I never even watched Spectre, because, yeah, as someone who doesn't massively love James Bond films to begin with, the idea of a mediocre, badly reviewed James Bond film didn't really appeal. And at that point, we did not have a podcast to make me feel vaguely obliged to see big name but also badly reviewed films. But I came to this still feeling pretty, everyone seems to like it. Yes, I probably won't understand some of the plot, but it's James Bond. The archetypes pretty much carry you through. There are a few occasional references to Madeleine's past with Spectre, but I suspect I'd understand more if I'd seen Spectre. But all you actually really need to know is in the film, and most of it, to be honest, at this point is about James Bond's emotional journey, which is a surprising thing to say, considering a lot of past James Bond films. But at this point, yeah, this is kind of the magnum opus, big final mega example of what they've been doing with Bond, I guess, since Daniel Craig came on board. The attempt to sort of combine this slightly darker 2000s onwards era of getting under the hero's skin psychological storytelling with still doing a little bit of the silliness and the gadgets and the quips. They stripped all that stuff away in Casino Royale, and especially from Skyfall onwards, he says, having not seen the film between those two. But in Skyfall specifically, I think, they started putting it back in, and now we've sort of reached a point where the two coexist surprisingly comfortably. It's a decent tone they found. I still kind of hope that whatever they do next, and it seems like pretty clear that there will be something next eventually. As I said earlier, it seems to take a while. I hope whatever they do next, it'll be a bit different. But yeah, as the sort of climax of the Daniel Craig time, I think it definitely felt like a very big, long, self-indulgent example of itself. I will criticise the villain at length later. I felt like the character played by Rami Malek was not very interesting. Ultimately, it's not his film. This is the Daniel Craig show through and through, which is, I guess, why they tossed off the villain a bit. But I felt they could have tossed him off a bit less.
Yeah, I think it's strange to see this as the last Daniel Craig Bond film. He's been doing Bond for quite a while now. I think, 15 years since Casino Royale come out. And the Craig films are very much a product of the era that kind of Casino Royale was released. It came out shortly after Batman Begins. There was a real sense of we want this darker, grittier version. I think it was also responding to the Bourne films, which were like a breath of fresh air after the kind of ridiculous Brosnan era Bonds. And they're really reacting to this and want more psychology, more darkness. And the world has kind of moved on from then to now, whereas obviously they're still doing that kind of mode of Bond, we've had the Dark Knight series, and now the more recent dark and gritty DC just kind of looks a bit silly. This is very much in that kind of brooding, more psychological Bond that we've had. And there's been a lot of ink spilled about how this is aged poorly and it's kind of not fun. But this film, I think, actually kind of bucks the trend in that it kind of pulls it together quite well, in that it does have a sort of that more psychological, there's much more like kind of character and arc to Bond in this film. But at the same time, it is just really entertaining action movie. There's like quite a lot of big, spectacular action sequences. It's very tense throughout, kind of really hooks you in. I know I only saw it last night, so I don't know how it'll age in my mind, but it's easily as the second best or possibly the best of the Craig Bond films, considering there's all these like talk about like reshoots and delays and script changes and stuff, which is usually a bad sign. And there was a trailer that didn't really make much sense that came out, but actually it really exceeded my expectations.
I mean, yeah, for a film that's 2 3/4 hours long and is paying off several films worth of subplots, it's surprisingly straightforward, you know. James Bond goes from location A to location B, has an action sequence which advances the plot, has a bit of exposition chat, and then goes to the next one. It's very easy to follow and straight. Like, as I say, I had missed a lot of probably relevant exposition in Spectre, but it didn't seem to matter, really. So yeah, I think there's a lot of what they've done here is they have successfully kept it simple, stupid. They have delivered a fairly straight Bond film, which, as a result, does feel like this kind of pinnacle of this form they're doing.
Yeah, it's got quite a lot of plot, but it still comes across as quite tight. There's not a lot of wastage. I mean, you probably could have made it shorter, but usually my criticism, especially when films get, past the 2 hour mark, is that like you can easily take sections of this out. Whereas, considering there's a lot of plot, there's loads of stuff we haven't even mentioned, or I didn't mention in my intro. There's a plot line where Craig's retired, so there's a new 007 character called Naomi, played by Latasha Lynch. She's very good in this. Lots of stuff with like Q and Ben Whishaw and Ralph Fiennes' M. There's going into Madeline's past. There's Bond, confronting Blofeld from the previous film. There's a whole section in Cuba where they bring in, a new sort of Asian character played by Ana de Armas, who was in Knives Out with Daniel Craig. They bring back Felix. There's so much going on. There's a whole rivalry between Spectre and this new villain that they've introduced. There's a whole thing with him, Madeline's past. There's quite a lot in this film going on, but it doesn't feel flabby. It doesn't feel poorly paced, and it doesn't get confusing, which was all of those, I think, were kind of issues with Spectre.
Yeah, I mean, considering the number of elements in play and the number of moves, the fact that it's not confusing is impressive. I mean, I guess this is as good as an opening to criticise the villain as any. I felt like the move from Spectre to this new villain was a bit of a downgrade because, at least Spectre and Blofeld had a little bit of presence and mystery, whereas I found the new guy kind of boring. But yeah, it did successfully keep things moving, and, you don't necessarily expect them to knock off basically the whole of Spectre to move on to the new guy quite so quickly.
Yeah, exactly. They also made the sensible decision to kind of just make the new villain be like a character in his own right. I was really worried, especially the kind of bringing back Spectre in the last film was like, okay, that makes sense. You can have like a big terrorist cell or mercenary group or whatever you want to call them as like the villains, but then shoehorning in Blofeld as well, and it kind of felt just too much like kind of ticking off things from James Bond lore. And I was really worried with this. There was going to be a moment with this character who's got a bioweapon and also has got like an island base. There's going to be a moment when he goes like, some people, Mr. Bond, call me Dr. No, and be like, oh, this is just pointless. But no, they avoided all that and just made the new villain a villain in his own right.
I was hoping he'd have big metal teeth and be Jaws.
They've not done that one either. I think the world has agreed that the Roger Moore Bonds are a bit too silly to bring back in our modern world. I think, obviously they did like, what if Jason Bourne was James Bond and had it just kind of like dark and gritty, no gadgets, no Q. He doesn't care which way he wants the martini done. And then they were kind of like, well, can we have like a modern Q and like a modern Moneypenny and things like that? And it was like, okay, fine, you can bring in some trad Bond stuff. There's like a gadget giving scene in this bit, where Q gives him the gadgets, talks him through them. There's a villain, he's got his henchmen, they've got their themes. Like, we can do like Connery era Bond or like Dalton era Bond, but anything from the Roger Moore is just too silly for people to accept.
Yeah, I mean, I think before it went wildly off the rails at the end, I think the Pierce Brosnan stuff did do a decent job of squaring the silliness with making it seem vaguely up to date. Well, up to date for the 90s. I dread to think how it would look to me now.
Yeah, I think they kind of lavished money on it and it kind of made it look spectacular again. There's a real like visual improvement for the Brosnan ones, which I think was kind of a breath of fresh air. Like the tank chase in St. Petersburg is like in GoldenEye is really spectacular, and like the villain's base looks much more convincing. But I guess we're not here to review old Brosnan Bond films.
This is true. I guess to hit my weak point and then move on from it, I thought the new villain played by Rami Malek, who does his best. I don't think Rami Malek is necessarily at fault here. I just thought it was quite a thin character who didn't. I don't know. I'm kind of reluctant to offer didn't get enough screen time as a critique in a film, which this is this long. But I don't really feel like he ever had enough development to really feel like he worked.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was not a great villain. I mean, it's a kind of classic Bond villain in that there's not really much to him. He's stolen a bioweapon. He has some vague plan to take over the world, wipe out the world, do something really evil. It's never really revealed where his like armies of goons come from, his money to pay them, or he's one of those classic like Bond villains. Like, if you think about this, it doesn't make sense, but we're not really here to like deeply scrutinize the machinations of like a Bond film. But yeah, I mean, he does a good job of being creepy and unpleasant. They weave in the character well with the exploration, like Madeleine's backstory. But yeah, it's not a really sophisticated character. We've had various Marvel villains that are more convincingly fully rounded characters. It's, you don't need a huge amount of like development to make the character believable, but you probably need a bit more than this character's served with.
I don't know. I think it's partly that his personality or his motivation is meant to quite heavily revolve around he has this sort of obsession with Madeleine, which motivates a lot of what he does, and I think that maybe that was the part that never seemed to entirely work for me. I don't know. It never felt like this was so important to his character, and yet so rarely felt like it fully worked.
Yeah, I mean, part of his motivation is he wants revenge against Spectre, who killed his family. That's great action movie writing. It's simple, it's believable, it doesn't require massive amounts of explanation. That makes sense. Again, like his weird obsession with Madeleine, which he met when she was a child, which I guess is just him being a creepy Bond villain. But it is, I don't know, it's thin. It's basically, yeah, it's not, it's not stellar. But I suppose, as you say, this is the Daniel Craig show. This is his swan song. And considering also the fact that they tried to make Spectre do this weird thing, how Bond was adopted by Blofeld's family, and it was just too much, trying to like, how do we weave all this together? This, at least, again, it avoided that pit.
Yeah, I appreciated the simplicity of it. If anything, maybe the thinness of the villain was just the other negative consequence of that simplicity, and that the villain himself ends up feeling a bit simple. But yeah, I don't want the fact that character didn't work for me to too badly overpower the fact that the rest of the film was, pretty good. I think, as I say, it's mostly about James Bond's journey here, and I thought, especially considering James Bond isn't necessarily a character known for his emotional depth, I felt like Daniel Craig did a decent job of making us feel like he was going through something here.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. The early scenes when he thinks he's been betrayed by Madeleine, Daniel Craig does a really good job of like showing how angry Bond is, and like, he's got a short fuse and he's an angry, violent person. But then, when he leaves her, it is, heartbreakingly intense. There are a few moments when I could almost feel that like a tear starting to well, which is an unusual emotional experience from a Bond film. I think it's helped by the fact that Daniel Craig is a really good actor, and also Lee Seydoux, I hope I pronounced that correctly, French actress. She's absolutely excellent. She's obviously great as Madeleine. I'm glad they brought her back. She's one of the things that was really good about Spectre. Yeah, so the two of them together really work well. They have a sort of chemistry, a kind of cold, icy Bond chemistry that's not based on sexual innuendos. It's a lot of the... you get a sense that they're people with an emotional relationship that is complex and painful for them. Again, which is more than you'd expect from a Bond film, and also isn't dragged out to kind of torturous length.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, at this point, borderline a cliche that any Bond love interest who survives the previous film, even if they seem really into each other, will probably be either ignored or about to die at the start of the next one.
And also with the whole bit in the middle of the film when he thinks Madeleine's betrayed him and he's single, it means that Bond can have sexual tension with, all the other women that he meets, even though he starts the film in a committed relationship. He can still have lots of sort of flirtations with both Naomi and Pamola, the Ana de Armas character.
Who was really good and who weirdly appears in one section of the film and then doesn't come back. I mean, leave us wanting more, I guess, and it might have been a bit strange if she popped up and announced, "James, I'm here to help," towards the end, but a strange but enjoyable brief appearance from her.
Yeah, that was a really good sequence. Again, it's a kind of self-contained bit of the film, like a sort of plot bit in the middle. It's its own almost like short film that then also connects to like the wider film. Yeah, and one of my criticisms is that I kept feeling, are they going to weave her back in a way? Seems like a big character to like build up. She's considered to be important enough that she's on, she's got her own poster on buses that are currently going around London.
I don't know, I guess there's a sense to it, but that was maybe the last time Bond got to go and have some fun, do some classic Bond antics. There was something very, even by Bond standards, kind of escapisty from the heaviness of some of the emotions in the rest of it in that sequence, which maybe the fact that she doesn't appear again and the film never gets that colourful again is meant to symbolise, but that bit's meant to be a sort of weird holiday from reality, I don't know. Or maybe I'm overthinking the fact that they only had that actor for a week or something, I don't know.
And it's possible it was one of those things that's been like moved around, cut. I mean, yeah, I think there's something to say that like they do a bit of kind of like classic Bond on a mission. He's infiltrating a party, you know, wearing a tuxedo, drinks a martini, then has a big shootout. It's kind of like there's a big chunk of classic Bond in the middle before they get back to the emotional stuff. There's a lot that's been said about this film about like, oh, is this like a very modern James Bond? Is James Bond going woke? I mean, there was a big thing when they announced the whole, you know, they were going to have a new 007, you know, being a black woman, as in not a new James Bond who's a black woman, but just a different character who's taken on the moniker of 007. And everyone was up in arms, and, you know, all the usual people who kind of get attention and money from basically being shits on the internet about this sort of thing were, again, making as much hay as possible. I did even over here in a pub, someone saying, I can't believe the next James Bond's a black woman. And I was like, no, it's 007. Craig is still Bond. You know, read the article before you get angry about wokeness. But, you know, with that said, you know, and again, like they, you know, it's clearly a much more modern Bond. They've got Natasha Lynn's character, you know, doesn't wear revealing dress. She wears like combat fatigues for a lot of the film. The Paloma character, even though she, you know, is quite revealingly dressed, still like kind of is kick-ass and kind of shooting guns. There's a lot of modern stuff. But that said, despite, you know, this is clearly a 21st century Bond film, there's a lot of trad Bond in there. You know, Bond saves various women at various points from danger. He's the alpha male. He's, you know, the kind of hard drinking, hard shagging, you know, angry man. He kind of masters all forms of transport, from motorbikes to off-roading is
that what the trad fans are here for? Bond on the most modes of transportation possible?
I mean, it's part of the thing, basically. What do you want from Bond? He looks good in a tuxedo, he shags lots of women, he drinks a lot, he makes quips, he kills people violently, he must drive a range of vehicles at different points in the film, obviously to get in as much product placement as possible. I mean, the big off-road chase through the Norwegian landscape looks amazing, but is also a large product placement for Range Rover. You know, he uses a series of guns, gadgets. You know, there's a lot of trad Bond in here. They balanced a good sense of like, you know, this is a modern Bond, he's psychologically complex, there are women who are more than sex objects, you know, they can be like his allies and things like that. But, you know, at the same time, they've clearly been like, right, what are the Bond things we're going to tick off? We're going to tick them off. You know, he must like have a car chase, he must drink some cocktails, he must flirt and make sexually suggestive comments at every woman he meets.
Yeah, he must murder huge amounts of henchmen with very little remorse.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
The body count is suitably high in this film, if that's what you're after.
Yeah, and I think they did a really good job of this 21st century Bond, but also I wasn't disappointed as someone who's seen a lot of Bond in my life.
No, as I say, I think this is very much a nice peak for this Bond. I mean, I'm not a scholar of the Bondian form, but, you know, I was there for the Pierce Brosnan era, limping sadly to a close before being taken around the back of the shed. And yeah, it's good to see this version go out on a high. Okay, so since I've now sort of alluded to the end of the film, or the end of this Bond era, we're now going to drop the full spoiler wall, the big metal blast doors, and discuss the ending in actual detail. So if you are cowering from No Time to Die spoilers, then as ever, this is your moment to check the show notes and skip to the What If segment. Off you go.
So, yeah, the ending of this film is probably my favourite part of it, and it's one of the things that really elevated it into being something I thought that was actually doing something different and original. There's a few twists along the way. I guess I'm going to drop sort of a series of spoilers now, but this is for the I have seen it only section of the podcast. Yeah, and including they reveal that James Bond has a daughter at one point, which was an interesting twist. I did notice actually in the breakup scene with Madeline, there's a moment when she kind of touches her stomach or lower abdomen, and I was a bit like, is that a hint that she's pregnant? And then, lo and behold, 5 years later, she has an adorable kid who then gets threatened a lot by the villain. So yeah, bringing in that was new, and also having Bond be killed at the end, in that they've never, I don't think, and I'm sure I've seen almost all the Bonds at this point, that they've ever finished off by killing off James Bond. I mean, this Bond, Craig's Bond, is very much a self-contained thing. They've delved into his past more. They've kind of put him on an arc journey. The fact they've actually concluded the journey, you know, definitively, without just, you know, the usual Bond sails off into the sunset with a Bond girl and then lives happily ever after. And the fact that they knew this was the ending of Daniel Craig meant they could do something like this. Those two things especially were like, they're doing something new and different, which I really liked.
I mean, obviously, it'll be interesting to see if this actually reflects much going forward, because obviously, now that they've put a firm full stop on the Daniel Craig era, they can just do a hard recess and start again with a new Bond and pretend none of this ever happened. But yeah, it is interesting to see them, if nothing else, with the freedom to go, well, it's the last one. Whoever goes next won't care what we do here, so let's just go all the way and kill him, which... Yep, I can appreciate them having the balls to do it, but obviously Daniel Craig's been talking with occasional amusing candour about his desire to stop making these films for about the last 2 or 3 of these now. Like, I think possibly ever since Skyfall, it's felt like he's been somewhat feeling around for the exit. I don't think anyone was that surprised that he's got some finality on this, and they are safe in assuming he probably isn't coming back.
Yeah, and it's a good way to finish it off, in that they actually completed an arc, and it meant it did build to a spectacular ending for the film. That he gets infected with the bioweapon, so he will kill, the people he loves if he comes into contact with them. So he makes the ultimate sacrifice. It goes to show that, like, underneath all the rage and violence and dark kind of machinations of Bond, and the fact that he is supposed to be this sort of like empty, broken person, at least in the Craig version, who just has sex with random women to fill the void in his soul, that it showed at the end that he did really, he was capable of love and making sacrifices for people that he loved. He didn't want to live in a world where he couldn't see the people that he loved, so he chose death, which is... There's something quite profound about that. Again, this is not the sort of level of profundity I expect from a Bond film, but it was also, it didn't seem out of place. It was a pleasant elevation of the Bondian arts, to borrow a phrase from you.
Yeah, I think it's something they've been sort of building to, this idea of James Bond getting in touch with his feelings over the course of this film, and maybe the last film I didn't see as well, but definitely this one. It felt like the natural climax. I liked the fact that, as well as being this slightly different, higher level of emotional sacrifice on Bond's part, it also, took place on an island base where he'd been infected by a bioweapon. There was enough James Bond in it for the slightly more novel elements to not feel like they were ramming us off into new territory. So yeah, it was a nice mix. As with this whole sort of film and the last few here, they a nice mix of the old and the new coming together to form a moment that did actually, elicit a tear from me there. Well done.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, that completely nails it. And they, I started this by saying the Craig Bond as a character is very much a product of the era that it first came about. That kind of, we want a more psychologically dark and gritty version of Bond, but it's more psychologically complex. And this felt like an appropriate way to end it, with a sort of seemingly dark and also psychologically complex ending. So even though the world has kind of moved on from the mid-aughts era Daniel Craig Bond, they kind of paid it off in a way that seemed relevant. So it kind of went full circle, which I liked.
Yeah. I mean, even though it's taken them an eternity to release these 5 films by relative Hollywood standards, yeah, I like the fact that it is a sort of compact series in its way. Like, as things often do in their final runs, they sort of revisited the beginning of the whole thing by having Bond visits Casino Royale love interest Vesper's grave at the start of the film, and then it sort of escalates from there. That nice sort of sense of, we know we're ending, we can close the circle, that you get in good finales, like in that final season of Lucifer I was talking about the other day.
Come all the way from Bond to Lucifer. Truly pop culture is concluded.
Much like Bond himself, who is, I'm sure, having a nice chat with Lucifer now. So sorry, Bond, but you did kill a lot of people.
A lot of people. Finally, this episode, we will be discussing the complete first season of What If from Marvel. This is the show that explores alternative realities in the MCU where things happen differently, such as what if Peggy Carter was Captain America, or what if all the Avengers died. We're doing something slightly different for this discussion. Nick and I are going to count down our top 3 what ifs, and then see if we can come to some kind of MFV consensus on what the best one is. But before all of that, Nick, what do you think of the show overall?
This show actually exceeded my expectations. I really thought I'd be sick of it by the end, and although I'm sure I will find things to quibble about, in fact I know I will because I have notes, I was still having a good time by the end. There are obviously some episodes that are better than others, as you say, we'll get to that. But I think they managed to make it fun. They managed to mix it up enough to that, for the most part, it was interesting to see how they changed things up, and moving from tone to tone, and yeah, as I think I said last time, doing the basic trinity of serious what if, silly what if, and dark apocalyptic what if. Yeah, I was pretty much with it. I think liking the comics probably helps. There's a very strong sense of comicness to these, but I do, and I did.
Yeah, the Disney competence machine is very much a factor here. I was going into this, I was like, some of these are going to be quite naff, aren't they? Or going to be just basically a bit rubbish. I don't think there was one that I thought like that was just total balls, or like that was just like kind of pointless. They all have like a sort of passable entertainment value. Again, they know how to do a fun adventure story with superheroes and some witty dialogue and some nice bits. I mean, this is a show that's very much for the fans. I think you'd have to watch all the MCU properties so far, or at least the majority of them, to really know what's going on, especially as kind of the most fun bits are when they mash things together. They bring things from different films into the same film and have, nods to this and the other. So if you're a fan, there's certainly lots there to enjoy and appreciate.
Yeah, I think that sort of interbreeding of the properties, interbreeding is probably not the right word for that, but hey-ho, is the sort of thing that would not work in the films, because much as fans might think they want it, it would actually make the films inconsistent and lack focus and destroy any sense of individual identity, and they just would crush them as stories. But there is an appeal to seeing that. One of the ways that this show can work is by, servicing that appeal.
Yeah, absolutely. The fact this alternative universe is they can be more relaxed and free, and they don't have to be so precious with the characters. They can do things that wouldn't normally work, or, because they've got that kind of freedom to experiment. And some of the experiments certainly worked better than others. Some of them I did walk away going like, yeah, that was great.
I mean, also, it helps that this is, one of the fundamental questions of this series is actually, what if Marvel had actually known their plan for the whole series from the beginning? Because realistically, for obvious reasons involving the passing of linear time, they couldn't have used any of the Black Panther elements in Iron Man, because they had no idea what the hell they were. Or, the Guardians turning up in 4. Or, I think, to be honest, a lot of the main trajectory of the overall Thanos storyline probably wasn't clear to them as early as they might like you to think it was. But obviously, when they're doing something like this sort of big picture, what if cherry picking, they can act like it was.
Yeah, and I liked how it kind of came together at the end. There's a Brazilian arc plot does actually emerge throughout the whole thing that actually kind of worked and then kind of pulled it together, and that kind of made it seem more than just a disparate collection of sort of anthology stories. There was an actual arc plot and finale to the whole thing.
I think it was the right level of arc plot. Like, it's enough to bring it together and make it feel like it was some kind of experience, but not enough to, overwhelm things or spoil the fun, because a lot of this is just silly fun. Like, a lot of the episodes which work best for me, to be honest, are probably the silly fun ones. Like, the zombies one was ridiculous, and that is sometimes the simplest, most fun thing you can do with the what if premise.
Yeah, I know, I completely agree with that. That's what I'm here for. And it's amazing they got all the voice actors, the range they did, including like Kurt Russell to do 2 lines. I don't know if he just recorded them on his like iPhone and just emailed it in or whatever. It may not be a huge time sink for him, but the fact they got such a huge range of the trad cast to come back.
Yeah, I listened to the Cinematic Universe podcast about this, and yeah, they were noting with interest which actors came back, partly just out of curiosity and partly, what can it tell us about the direction of the MCU? They also, as a lot of people did, noted with amusement that Iron Man dies in an alarming amount of these episodes.
Yeah.
Whether that's meant to be an ongoing joke or just a remark on the fact that they no longer have access to Robert Downey Jr., I don't know.
That's an impressive level of Marvel criminology.
There's plenty more. But yeah, I think the only other criticism I sometimes felt is that their palette sometimes felt a bit limited. Like, they felt like they were hitting the same events quite a bit sometimes. I mean, there were some episodes that went a bit more into the niches or the corners. There was a whole episode, obviously, retelling Doctor Strange. And interesting to see them go into one film in that depth. But there was also quite a lot of Avengers-y stuff, which is, it's me complaining about them using the popular thing, I guess. But I felt like we got quite a lot of alternative takes on Thanos and Infinity Stones and Iron Man.
Yeah, there's very much a thing. They kind of came back to some of the core characters a lot. There was a lot of Captain Marvel, I felt, considering it was a sort of like, there'd only be one Captain Marvel film. And sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't, I suppose. Yeah, I guess similar to your palette comment, I kind of wish they'd varied the animation style a bit more. I mean, they're all supposed to be different reality. You could have had like slightly different animation styles. I'm not saying they should go full animatrix and have like, one be like CG and one be like anime style and one be like hand drawn, but like maybe a bit more visual variation would have been nice.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess the problem is they obviously had their eye on the finale, the grand unification of everything, which would probably have maybe been made harder if they'd dicked around with the animation style much. But yes, it would have definitely been interesting to see them try that.
It is true. They can't all be Spider-Verse.
That was my other complaint. Not enough Spider-Man. Why wasn't there more Spider-Man? I thought first maybe he wouldn't be in it at all due to, one of the tangled webs of Sony agreements. But no, he was there, just not in very many of them. Anyway, yes, I believe those are all my geek points. Shall we start counting down?
Yes. Do you want to do your third favourite first, and then I'll do my third favourite second? that was convoluted, but I assume it made sense.
Yeah, sure. Okay, yep. So my third favourite What If was What If Ultron 1. This was the penultimate episode of the series, which I think a lot of what works about this was kind of the way it built on previous ones, to be honest. The way it gave us a sort of climax and a sort of resolution to a lot of things. And also, because we'd gotten used to the way it works with the Watcher staring at realities and being this sort of separate presence, but very slowly becoming more in focus. This bit where the story came up and smacked into him actually did have a lot of impact because it had been built up to so slowly and effectively. So yeah, in a way maybe I'm giving plaudits to a lot of the whole season here, but as a result of the work they did all season, the penultimate episode landed for me quite well. I really enjoyed the reality shifting fight between the Watcher and Infinite Gems Ultron as well.
Yeah, that was good. Yeah, I really enjoyed this episode as well. I thought it was like a good, tense, dark story. It was kind of quite bleak how what happened if Ultron, wiped out almost all the people in the world and then the universe. I think considering Ultron wasn't best served by the film he was in, its flaws are well documented, but this gave him a chance to be a kind of properly like evil, maniacal villain. And also it was nice that the big villain of the piece wasn't Thanos again.
It's true, this was probably a better moment for Ultron. Well done, Ultron.
Yeah, so my third favourite, the other three, was What If Doctor Strange Lost His Heart Instead of His Hands, which touched on briefly, the one in which Doctor Strange turns to evil magic in order to save his love who dies in the car crash at the beginning, rather than him breaking his hands as it happens in the film. And yeah, it kind of goes to some quite dark places and stuff, but it also kind of works as if, the classic story of someone's motivated by love and grief to do absolutely terrible things.
Yeah, as I say, Dark What If is very much a classic. I guess we've both sort of gone for Dark What If here in the third slot. And this one was pretty good as well. I liked the way it sort of built back on the time loop stuff from Doctor Strange, which I think was probably the most interesting part of that film. And I also enjoyed the sort of tease that things were going to work out before they eventually didn't. I thought they played that quite nicely, drawing on our expectations and then crushing them.
Yeah, I liked how it did build to quite a dark, depressing ending that, no, you're not more powerful than fate. And, he's driven to the point of consuming, I think, the entire universe in the end. And just been kind of trapped alone in the universe forever.
Yep. Plus our first moment of Watcher contact at the end. Exciting stuff.
Yeah, no, that was a good one.
Right, so my number 2 then is What If Killmonger Rescued Tony Stark? As well as Dark What If, there is occasionally, but there weren't actually that many of these, the sort of episodes where they just do a What If and take it semi-seriously, just explore an alternate version, and I really enjoyed this. I thought that this was actually quite a nice character piece for Killmonger and quite an interesting alternative take. Some of these episodes don't work. My worst episode was probably the third one, which did something similar in terms of telling a sort of serious-ish story, but I thought kind of fell a bit flat and felt like basically a truncated movie. But I liked the Killmonger one. I thought there was a strong vocal performance by Michael B. Jordan, who made it all feel very in character for Killmonger. And to be honest, this was probably only kept off the number 1 spot by the ending, which I thought was that it?
Yeah, I really liked this one as well. It's not in my top 3, but it was a very good one. And yeah, it felt like a sort of film in its own right. You could just have done that as a film and it would have been very entertaining. I kind of liked the relationship between Killmonger and Tony Stark, which isn't in the MCU at all. But the characters do complement each other. They've both got that kind of manic drive to the point of sometimes not seeing the people they're hurting to do the terrible things. Obviously, Tony Stark is ultimately a good guy and Killmonger is ultimately a villain. But they do complement each other quite well, especially in the kind of global arms trade, mass destruction market, which they both kind of move in.
Yeah, and I thought Killmonger's couple of beats in the finale were also quite nicely done and in character. A bit convoluted, but yeah.
Yeah, and also Michael B. Jordan's great. I'm here for anything he's in.
Yeah.
My second favourite, we've already discussed it, is What If Ultron won? Yeah, I just liked how dark this was. Again, gone for a couple of dark ones here. It was dark, it was grim, it was depressing, it was, something that they couldn't really do. What if almost every character at all was wiped out? They couldn't really do it in this. Some good Black Widow content as well.
Yeah, even some very good Hawkeye content.
Yeah. Good focus on those characters. And also, it was nice that it was Hawkeye who died this time and Black Widow got to...
It's only fair. Right, does this bring us to my number 1?
Yes, drum roll moment.
Yeah, another one we've already discussed, although not in this podcast episode. My number 1 did end up being What If T'Challa Became Star-Lord, which was the second episode of the series. They correctly recognised this was good and put it quite close up front. Followers of obvious patterns in my thinking will note that I have basically gone for one dark one, one serious one, and one silly one. But I do still think that, much as I liked Marvel Zombies and Party 4, the 2 episodes I just mentioned are probably a bit better. But this one I thought was the whole package, the double threat or whatever. It had a lot of enjoyable silliness, a lot of weird stuff that it threw itself into, like blonde-haired noir femme fatale Nebula and weird reformed genocide dad Thanos. And also, it's somewhat seriously taken emotions with T'Challa's journey. And also, yes, it is quite sad to hear this final, certainly final major substantial lead performance by Chadwick Boseman in an MCU role, or I think very probably at this point any role. So yes, I thought this one was the best.
No, it was very good. It didn't make my top 3, but that doesn't mean it was bad. That means I just didn't put it in my top 3. But I did really like it. I did love the basic premises. Like, T'Challa's just so nice. He could talk Thanos down. He's just such a great guy.
It's ridiculously silly, and I think I see some people reacting with scorn to that level of silliness, but I'm entirely here for it.
I'm willing to buy into a silly alternative take in a whole animated Ultimate Dimension show. Let's not take this all too seriously. Yeah, that was great, and like they weaved in quite a lot of characters. I did like the ones that weaved in lots of characters, such as the Ultron one or this one. Pretty much all of the space-based intergalactic MCU kind of crop up at one point or another in some form. Yeah, and there's a heist and everything like that. Again, similar to the Killmonger and Stark one. It felt like a film. It's something that could be a film, but it didn't feel like rushed or that they sacrificed something to make it fit into one episode.
Yeah, this was about the right length. Some of them, yeah, as you say, felt a bit rushed, but no, this one was good material. Okay, so what's your best one?
My favourite is, again, it's one we've discussed. I chose 2 dark ones, but I thought the one I enjoyed the most was What If Thor Was an Only Child? AKA What If Thor Was a Party Dude? As much as I enjoyed the dark ones and there were some great dark stories, this one was just really funny, and I just really thought it was great fun. And, it kind of reminded me to some degree of Thor Ragnarok, in that silly Thor being funny, but with some sort of spectacle and action is like a great combination. They took a while to find a tone that really worked with Thor, but I am very much here for this tone, and this was a good example of it. It was funny. They weaved in lots of characters again. Every character from kind of space-based MCU stuff was there. There's like a Nebula bit and stuff, and Captain Marvel has quite a bit to do, and they bring back a lot of the characters in the original Thor. It's just really funny, and it's just like silly and completely over the top.
I think again, Cinematic Universe made this point, and I'm borrowing it. I thought the Jane Foster Thor relationship almost worked better here than it did in the film. It was quite sweet.
Yeah, I liked that as well. Yeah, bringing in like Jane Foster, Darcy, and Captain Marvel to kind of as a team was kind of cool. And there was just some bits like when they were going to use the Seattle Arch as like a slingshot or something like that. It was also the classic story of the parents have gone away for the weekend and someone's throwing a party that gets out of hand.
Yeah, the fact that it didn't really have an action climax, it just had people telling Thor's mum, was, I thought, pretty good.
Yeah, it was just silly, fun stuff.
Yeah, no, as I say, I made an attempt to mix up the top 3. If there had been a number 2 silly one, it would definitely have been this one. This one was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So yeah, as you may have heard, as we've now praised most episodes, to be honest, yeah, I think we enjoyed this.
Yeah, that goes to show we chose a wide range of different ones. If there's any consensus, I think the only one that got into both of our top 3s was What If Ultron won. To be fair, I'm willing to accept anything that we discussed as a kind of a standout episode.
Yeah, I think What If Ultron 1 is probably as good a single best episode as any. But yeah, they're all good material. I mean, there are very few I would just say, we'll just skip it. Maybe the third one. I didn't love the Captain Carter episode as much as I think I wanted to, or they wanted me to. I felt it was maybe a bit going through the motions of it, but it was fine.
It was a good one to start with because it's the most accessible version of the premise. Like, a single event transpires differently and a whole new story emerges. So it's a good one to start with, but it was classic, like, okay, you've got the basics. Now, what crazy shit can we do with this?
Yeah, it was also, though, kind of the most straightforwardly, almost dull one. Like, they just went through the film again.
Yeah.
Started off with that almost left beat, a bit of a, oh no, they're not all going to be like this, are they? Happily, they were not. Okay, and that was Modern Fantasy Violence. Thank you very much for listening. If you've enjoyed this show, then please consider visiting our website at moderatfantasyviolence.com to find other Moderate Fantasy Violence themed content, or leaving us a nice review on your podcast downloading platform of choice, because it helps. Somehow it helps. It helps me.
You can also find more from us online by going to Facebook and searching for Moderate Fantasy Violence, or following us on Twitter, where we're at MFV Podcast. If you follow us now, or go to Twitter now, providing you're listening to this on the day it comes out, you'll probably be able to catch my last few days of content about the London Film Festival that I'm at, or you can scroll back through the timeline and look at what I've been seeing and enjoying at the London Film Festival this year. You can also get more of that on my Twitter, which is at AlistairJRBall, or find more from me at redtrainblog.com.
And I've been Nick Bryant. You can follow me on Twitter at NickMB, where I am no longer plugging my Kickstarter quite as aggressively, as I am moving into the final stages of packing it up. I was literally packing some parcels before coming on this podcast, everyone. Or you can find more static details of my comics and so on at nickbryan.com. And yeah, aside from all that, we'll be back here in 2 weeks with a perfect symbiosis of modern culture. It is the new Dune movie and Venom, Let There Be Carnage. We'll see you next time. Let there be another episode.
Bye. Sorry, are you doing the bye, or are we just going to leave it?
Oh, sure. Bye. Bye, everyone. Bye.
Seamless.